mean, one of the ideas I had, it's not very exciting, but it was about the persona of an administrator, and do people even really know that those people exist? What does that really mean? That type of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, what you're saying there is the when you say persona of administrator, if I say I'm like a smart plan administrator, that means one thing to me, but that might be something different to you. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about just like the overall, like what an administrator is supposed to do, or what that kind of person is, I guess.
Well, if you look at it from an IT perspective, you've got generally it's managing a whole pool full of applications. Maybe that's one of the challenges why engineering applications don't translate real well to IT, because in IT you join the team and supposedly you support all hundreds of applications, right? So you're not really good at any of them. No offense to the IT crowd. You're not a specialist in any of them. You just keep them all running. But like with a smart engineering application, you have people that devote their entire career just to knowing that one app. They come to work every day, 2,080 hours a year, all day long to support one app, Aviva E3D or Hexagon Smart PNID or something. Like they devote their entire career. They were a project person, they were a drafter, designer, somebody, and they dive so hard into one app. And there are a few people that are crossover. Maybe they know a second app, kind of, or maybe they can cover a couple. But really, everybody falls back to like one application. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, it's not like I'm bashing on IT. It's not like you're an expert at Word or something like that, right? If you're supporting Word or Excel or like a whole bunch of different apps, but you have to be an expert when you're supporting an enterprise level uh, authoring application, I guess you could call it that, right? For the engineering side. So if you're supporting instrumentation like Smart Plant instrumentation or Aviva instrumentation, you have to not only know the app itself, you also have to know the domain that the app applies to.
The best ones do. They understand the
Yeah.
domain and they understand the app, and they probably worked in the tool at some point in their life and they realized that they were pretty good at it. And instead of using it as a user, they were going to change their career and they were going to be a support team member for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so whereas IT is maybe constantly getting thrown new apps and they know them well enough to just understand the high level basics. How is it licensed? How do people access it? And their whole job is to make something available. But if you're an engineering application administrator, your job is not to make something available. It is to make people successful. So you're partly a coach and you're partly a subject matter expert, and and basically you're supposed to enforce the rules of the app. You're supposed to tune it. And I mean, there are a couple of things here, Blake. Is one is just what does that persona period look like, which is I'm kind of describing now. And the other is like, well, why don't people just support 10 apps? You know what I mean? Because sometimes we'll get in a scenario, a company will call us and they'll want to use a smart PNID tool, a 3D modeling tool, an instrumentation database, an electrical database, and then they're like, "Hey, I'm going to go out to the market and I'm going to post a job because I want one person to support all four of those." And then we kind of look at them, we're like, "Well, that person doesn't exist. They kind of do, but they really
I
don't." Like,
I think what happens there is because it would, those people that are generally doing that are coming at it from an IT perspective, right? And they're saying, hey, it's just an application that has a database, right? And what they're thinking on support is, oh, well, I got to support the server, I got to support the database, right? If you're gonna have like a hosted environment and you're going to have terminal services or something like that, I got to support the infrastructure is basically what you're talking about, right? And that's how they're looking at it. And one person could support the infrastructure for multiple apps, sure. But to support the app itself, to make your end users successful, like you were saying, that's not good enough. because you have to know the application and then know the domain within the application. And what I mean by that is all of them are similar, but we'll take like a smart plant instrument. When you're supporting that app, you're supporting the naming conventions for your plant area unit structure. You're supporting the specification library that is going to be used across your fleet. You're supporting the templates for your loop drawings, right? That's going to be used across your feet. Your title block, your symbology, right? You're supporting like the vendor approved equipment list. So like your vendor approved manufacturers, different types of models that you have in your plant, right?
Yeah,
Like
and
you're
everything you just
supporting that kind of information, not just, hey, I got FT 101 that goes to, that's like a flow control loop or something like the actual engineering and design information. You're supporting the information that facilitates the engineering and design.
Yeah, and everything you just mentioned is tied to one particular discipline, one particular sort of skill set. And then conversely, I could have a person who's a 3D modeling support person, and they're worried about pipe supports, and they're trying to figure out the pipe specs, and they're trying to figure out, the valve placement in the model and the way that the piping lines are managed and the way the ISOs are going to get created. It's a totally different like discipline. It's a totally different. Yes, the person that's doing it they might be writing a script to administer it. They might have a SQL database. They might have a symbol file, but they're two totally different root subject matters. And so typically in the industry, if I'm a 3D modeling support person, I essentially am dedicated to one of those vendor applications, whether it be the Aviva E3D model, whether it be an AutoCAD 3D model, whether it be Hexagon. And I really become a specialist around that one app. And then
Yeah.
companies go out and hire and they say, I need a Hexagon Smart 3D engineer administrator. And that role is a role like all by itself. And I just figured it was worth a little discussion because I bet a lot of people don't understand that. And they think that maybe those people are interchangeable, or they don't understand like the craft of being an administrator. Does that make sense?
No, I 100% agree with that. I mean, we see that all the time when we're talking to some of our clients, right? They're like, "Oh, well, I'm going to use the 2D tools." It happens a lot on the 2D side. I'm going to use the 2D tools. I'm going to use P&ID and an electrical tool and an instrument tool. I'm going to get one guy that admins all of those. And you're like, "Okay, well, that's like a unicorn of a person, right? Like that, there's not
Very
really
hard to be.
one guy that does that."
So to be really good at this type of task, number one, you have to understand a database. Number two, you have to understand some sort of programming configuration stuff. And then number three, you have to understand the discipline. So for you to find someone who is good at all of those things and also good at piping and also good at instrument and also good and experienced at electrical all at the same time, it's just very rare,
Yeah.
right? And typically if you have someone who's tasked with covering multiple, they have one that they're really an all-star in, and they have others that they're serviceable in, but they're not as much of an authority. And they're not going to give you all of the nitty-gritty expertise that you really want. And so you're looking at like, if I want a smart P&ID administrator, that alone is a job description all on its own. And typically a company that's running smart P&IDs will have at least one person that's 100% dedicated to that app and to that function. And there's no education path that gets you to that. You have to cross over from something. You had to
Yeah.
either be a project person that said, hey, I like the technology more than the project. I want to learn how to be an administrator. Or you had to be like a software vendor support person and said, okay, I want to move into this role in the industry. So I'm going to leave the vendor company. I've built up enough expertise working actually for the vendor to go and be it in private industry. But there's not like nobody leaves high school, Blake, and says, all right, day one of my education for my post high school degree, I'm going to go be a smart tool administrator. Like I don't, that doesn't exist, right?
No.
You go to be trained to be an engineer or designer, and then you go to work on projects, and then you become an administrator. So it's like the path is a bit of a crooked path. And you could sometimes go back. I've seen some administrators go back, but a lot of people just take that turn into administration and they stay there
And they stay there. Yeah.
because they're unique now. They're more unique, right? So for every, let's say, engineer and designer that uses a tool, let's say for 10 users, you'll have one support person.
Yeah.
So in the industry, then obviously you can define maybe a little more value in being that one versus the 10.
Yeah.
Does that sound fair?
No,
But like
I think that's right.
like you were saying earlier, I think when some of these applications are basically put under the umbrella of IT not really being familiar with that type of strategy kind of tends to say, okay, well, that's just in the pool of the 100 things that we do. I don't have a specialist for that. We'll cover it as a team. Whereas administrative teams are built the opposite way. I need a specialist for X, Y, and Z application. And then I'll fill in some fluff between them later, maybe some coverage, but I start with having a home run hitter, all-star admin for each one.
Admin. Yeah, I also think that there's getting into that IT side of things. Some people try to solve that by say, hey, we're gonna go to the cloud, right? Like if it's in the cloud, I don't have to have an administrator on my team. And then the question there is okay, that's good. What cloud are you going to? And do they understand that support model? Because if they don't understand that support model and they are approaching their cloud like a standard IT type organization, then their support in the cloud itself is not going to be what you actually need or wanting, right? The software is
Okay.
not going to work any better, right? You're
Okay.
still going to have the same problems.
Yeah. So what you're describing is the fact that the persona we're discussing is 80% discipline related, 20% or 75-25, let's say, IT. So that person is tasked with making sure the server is running decently, making sure the app is licensed decently. That's their 25% job. The 75% is coaching, the discipline, making sure things are being done, best practices, understanding everything right. And so what you're saying is if an organization says, well, hey, I'll solve this problem, I'll just I'll just outsource this to a cloud, the cloud provider usually only provides the 25%. They make sure the database is available, the version is functional, the patches are applied and stuff like that. They don't supply the 75%. That's the discipline specific side of it. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%, right?
Yeah.
Like they think because what happens sometimes is somebody will get that system, they'll set it up, and it won't be their support will be lacking because of all the problems that we're talking about, and then they'll get an idea saying, oh well, uh, I can't find that admin person out there, or it's too hard to find that admin, or I'm gonna have to have three of those admins to support each of these tools. Solution here is I'll just put it in a cloud, a third party cloud somewhere, uh, and they'll do that. And then what happens is a lot of times is the third party cloud that you go to. Well, I actually believe that is a viable solution. A lot of times the third party cloud they go to is an IT cloud. And so they didn't actually solve their problem. They just transferred it to another group that has the same problem. And in some instances that can be worse because then they not only have the same problem, then they compounded their problem by some type of data access, right? Now they're not getting the access to the data that they want or something of that nature.
Yeah.
Uh,
And and when we were talking earlier about this role of an administrator, they need to be good friends with IT. They're separate, they're different, but that administrator I described that has to know about the database and know about this file structure and the versioning and the licensing, they have to be aware of it but some of the things that they need to support the app are not in their
Are
jurisdiction.
not in there.
So
Yeah.
you're talking about like the database backup itself. Well, that's a
Yeah.
DBA that supports them, and that is a general IT function, right? The direct Active Directory security groups, that may be an IT function that you're supporting. So to support an app, let's say a smart like a 3D model, I need the persona we're describing, and sometimes multiple of them, right? I mean, I need a team of 3 or 4 or 5 administrators to support that 3D model. But there's a 25% FTE or some small percentage FTE IT resource that has to be their friend, that has to be an extension of them to help them when they need to recover a database backup or when
Well,
they need to do some type of upgrade, right?
I think you bring up a good point there because yeah, you're exactly right. And the first line of defense though, generally is the administrator, the actual application administrator, because they help filter out what the problems are. A great example of that is so within like smart plant instrumentation or something like that, if you're using terminal services like Citrix, like your environment is on even an internal cloud. You're using terminal services. You got Citrix. You have end users. End users sends you a problem. The problem is they can't load a spec sheet. It'll say something like that, like I can't load the spec sheet. Okay, well that could be an internal application issue with smart plant instrumentation. That could be uh, a server issue, like an SQL database server issue, or that could be a terminal services issue, and it's just a view that they can't see, right? Um, Depending on what the problem is, you might have to get that IT friend to help you resolve it, right?
But most of the time, the best one to diagnose what the problem is the administrator.
Correct.
They're the triage team member because they can identify where the source of the problem
Yeah,
lies, and then
100%.
they need to ask for help with that. And I think that's another issue that gets kind of confusing is when someone says, "All right, we will allow this engineering support team. We will be okay with it, but our triage all goes through IT." And you're like, okay, that kind of sucks because you're going to get a bunch of questions, a bunch of tickets that you don't fully understand. And
Yeah.
really, it for those apps, it needs to be inverted. You got to let the expert triage it first and ask for help when they need it, uh, or else the tickets aren't going to be classified very well and they're not going to be solved very quickly. That type of stuff. Is that true?
Yeah, and I would say it kind of gets, it's not just a triage either. Some of the questions are like you were saying earlier, they got to be a little bit of a coach. And even on that, I would say there's a different level of involvement depending on what it is that the end user is trying to do. And what I mean by that is, say you're in operations and you're doing MOCs on your facility or something of that nature. Um, okay, well that's going to be low user count, right? Maybe you get some questions here and there, but the volume is going to be low. But say you're trying to execute a major capital project and you have multiple engineering teams trying to work in the same environment or on the same domain with, you know, a handful of engineers and a handful of designers. Well, your level of involvement from a support perspective is going to go up to support that workflow or that work process, if you will. Right.
Yeah, and you're just saying in order to be efficient, the person reading that, interpreting it, needs to be knowledgeable, and that generally comes from the app administrator concept. Uh,
Yeah, well, they need to be knowledgeable and they need to also understand the timelines, right? So when you're executing a project, if you take if you say, "Hey, I got that ticket in, I'll get it when I get around to it," and you get around to it in 2 or 3 days, and you're holding up the project from doing work for 2 or 3 days, how many man hours are you burning right there, right?
yeah.
Like what are you doing? You don't have that luxury necessarily on some of those larger capital projects like that. No, you need a resolution soon. You got to get
Okay.
those guys back to work.
All right. I want to pivot a little bit related to this. Not all organizations handle it this way. sometimes organizations put to support person on the project team, and they're not necessarily just support. They're like a designer
Hmm.
with a bunch of administrative capabilities. Um, but to be honest with you, I've seen that be less successful. It feels good in the moment because you're like, hey, I have this superhero on the project that gets to develop cool stuff and he has administrative rights and does all that. But number one, that's dangerous because they're a little bit unchecked. You know, like who do they report back to, right? They report to themselves essentially. So they're running wild, doing sort of risky configuration things at times.
You get your
And
rogue agent.
yeah, and then organizationally, if you do that, then you've got this divergence across your organization from Project A that had Administrator A and was doing kind of whatever they wanted to do. Meanwhile, Project B had a different administrator, super user, and they were generating a bunch of deliverables but doing things differently. Then you bring those two back together after a couple of years, and you're like, uh-oh, we did things differently on different projects because we didn't have a centralized team that was that really had an authority on the administration of that application. Does
Yeah,
that
I would
make sense?
100% agree with that. You have to have that kind of centralized team, understanding what the effects are. So if you change some type of configuration with inside of the program, say you're using, your specification library or even your symbol library or whatnot, for some of the other applications, well, you don't want to have multiple data sets of those, right? You want one and you want it to be consistent across all of your projects, or you want it to be consistent across all your fleet. And a lot of times what you're saying is if you put that guy that has the knowledge to be able to execute some of those tasks and has the access to do that, well, then you wind up with variation in that supporting data level. You wind
Well,
up with the variations, right?
yeah, and that support person is in that case responsible for meeting the schedule of deliverables. So they might take some liberties to do things
Oh
that
yeah.
could be a little bit risky, right? Something that a normally administrator would say, no, I'm not going to allow that type of script or that type of special approach because I think you put the database at risk. You need to do it the more traditional way. So if you have that local admin philosophy, super user, lead designer type person, they also have some dangerous tools potentially, depending on your software or what you're doing. They could make choices there that normally your administration team would say, no, that's not a good strategy. You're taking a risk. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So the other thing I would say too is, so when you have that on project administrator, they take ownership. They're in the data. They're making changes. To me, your centralized administration persona actually doesn't really change the data. They don't really own the data. They just facilitate the system. So if I've got, let's say I've got 1,000 engineers and designers in my company, and I've got 10 administrators, let's say, or maybe that number's a little off, 20 or 30 administrators that are supporting these 1,000 people. Well, that administration team has a hands-off approach to the actual data. So they don't just go in and type a new description or add a new symbol or change like the way something is routed or the way that it looks, because technically their job is they're not on the project. They are a support system. If they see something that they think is bad practice, they should mention it to the project team, but they don't actually just open up the tool on their own and just improve something, even if it's kind of clear, because their role is hands off. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say there that it goes back to what you said a minute ago is if they see that their job is to inform the team, right? And inform them, bring it up, say, hey, I think what you're doing here is not right, or say, hey, why are you building it out this way, or why are you using that symbol, or why are you using this workflow? You know what I mean? If they see something like that on the project, I think their job is to bring it up in a coaching type manner.
Yeah. Well, I
But
think
not
that's
go in there and just change it because there was some reason why the user did what they did, right? And if you
Yeah.
just go in there and change it, you might be changing some kind of design philosophy that they were using, or some kind of engineering philosophy that they were using that you just don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen an administrator who was a project person move over to be an administrator, but then still felt like they owned the project data. And
Yeah,
so late in the day, they'd see something they didn't like, oh, I wouldn't have drawn it that way. And they change it.
and they
Like,
change it. Yeah,
no, no, your identity needs to change. You're now a facilitator and a coach, and you need to teach. Now, I'll say the other side of that coin is I've seen administrators get so detached from the project that they just keep the tool running and they don't even look to see if the data's good or if there's any suggestions they could add. They're just like sitting there and they're just like, okay, all I do is just answer questions when they come in. I don't offer any insight. I don't think that's good either. I think you want an administrator that's curious and interested and wants to be helpful, but wants to communicate it in the right way.
yeah, 100%. I agree with that.
I mean, have
Yeah.
you seen some where it's like just kind of like a robot administrator where technically they know the tool and technically they just say yes to every request?
What, what, what?
And because what you really want is some requests come in and they're just a bad idea. You want to go to the user and say, hey, that's a bad idea. Let me explain why. You don't just want an administrator to just receive this ticket that's a terrible idea and say, fine, I need to kill 4 hours. I'll just do that task, right? That's a bad
Yeah,
strategy too.
100%. I think you're right in the aspect of it. So if you're moving somebody up that was on the projects, and then you're new to the administrative, the challenge there is what you said a minute ago, where you have the problem that that person still thinks that they're on the projects, and they start going in and making changes to the projects when they shouldn't be doing that. What you have on the flip side of it is, if it's somebody coming from IT, or somebody that has been an administrator for a long time, then they get into the mentality that you're talking about, where they're like, I'm just going to answer the question face value, right? Like, can you do that? Sure, you can do that. Is it
Is
a
it a
good
good?
is it a good idea? No, it's a terrible idea, but go ahead, do whatever you want. You're the project. You know what I mean? And you're like, no, no, your job is to help them not your job is to help them miss those potholes. So if you see it as a bad idea, you need to say, hold on, wait a minute. Miss that, there's a pothole right there. Don't fall into it. Let's walk around it, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. All right. Well, we're coming up on kind of a time frame that we had set for this meeting, but I think for me, it was the idea of understanding the fact that there are these roles that exist that are so specific to supporting apps, so much so that people kind of focus their career on supporting an app, one
yeah,
app
one
inside of
app.
one
Yeah.
discipline. But it's actually a very valuable role. It's a good job in the industry. And uh, and it should be respected and appreciated. I think that there's maybe a lot of people have never really seen how exactly what that looks like, how those people operate
Yeah,
and the jobs that they
they
do.
just don't know, right?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
no, it's good. Good conversation.
Okay. Cool.
Till next time.